This is it. We'd all be speaking Persian if it wasn't for Israel. That's what you're going with, Netanyahu? Really? That was your final answer? The human shields argument, I'm sorry, this just does not account for 80% of the buildings in Gaza being leveled.
So Dave Smith recently went on a rampage against Netanyahu, who he calls a lying war criminal. This coming after a recent interview on another podcast with Netanyahu. Dave breaks it down and exposes some of the lies and propaganda Netanyahu is using to sell the bloodbath and destruction in Gaza. So let's get his take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. We'll figure it out.
I would say is a paragon of freedom in an area that doesn't exactly enjoy freedom. And to have young Americans march and support these mass rapists, these people who beheaded men, who burnt babies alive, I'm talking about the Hamas monsters, is that their ideal? They don't know nothing. I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. And I want to bring that truth to them. So Israel is a great free society and the best partner that America has anywhere on earth.
Great people there for sure. When we visited, everyone was so welcoming and people were inviting us over for dinner and stuff. But I see, like, that's the thing too. I'm not claiming to be an expert too, but I'll just read stuff on like X and like people will say like Israel's killing babies or like they're starving people.
That's completely false. In fact, the reason we have civilian casualties in Gaza is because Hamas, who are basically horrible murderers and killers, okay, committed to our destruction and your destruction. They say so openly. I mean, they say the big enemy, the real enemy, the great Satan is America. And Israel is the small Satan. But it's a small Satan that is standing in their way of conquering with other Iranian proxies, conquering the Middle East, and then we move on to you. So America is the great Satan, and America, needs to disappear. And we stand in their way. But one of the things you have to understand is Gaza is the densest urban environment you can find, and Hamas embeds itself in the civilian population of Gaza, the Palestinians, okay? We tell the Palestinians, hey, leave, because after they butchered us and raped our women and beheaded our men and burned our babies, we have to remove this threat. So we come in to take care of the Hamas terrorists. But the Hamas terrorists don't leave the civilian neighborhoods. And we say to the civilians, we call them up because we have their telephone numbers. We say, leave, please leave. We send them leaflets, millions of leaflets, please leave. We do everything that is possible that no army has done. They want to leave. You know what Hamas does? They shoot them. You say, we want you to stay because we want to have civilian casualties, because then they can show it on CNN or all these other networks and so on and play that Israel is deliberately doing this. We're not deliberately doing anything. We'd like them to leave. And in fact, successively during the war, it's been now a year and a half, they finally do leave, most of them. So we've minimized those casualties, but it's not because we seek to have civilian casualties, it's because Hamas wants them. They're willing to sacrifice their own children, their own families, both because they don't really care for human life, but also because they think it's very good propaganda against us. And if they just let them leave the war zone, get to this.
I gotta say, it's like after, just spending a considerable amount of time talking about this issue and doing a lot of debates on this subject, I'm still just blown away, no pun intended, by this defense. Like, it's like, I just don't even know, in what world does this even sound persuasive to say? Like, in what world where someone goes like, hey, you killed a lot of people, and you're like, yeah, no, I know that makes me sound like the bad guy when you say I've killed a lot of people. But what about if I told you that before I killed them, I called them and went, leave or we'll kill you? Do you sound like the good guy in the movie now?
Not at all. Dave's right. It doesn't matter whether they told them to leave or not. If it's their property and they threaten them with coercion or military force or worse, utter destruction like they have in Gaza, just by saying leave first, it doesn't fix anything. And there was so much propaganda and absurdity in Netanyahu's full statement there. Just, galloping through it, the beheading babies thing has been totally debunked in every way. Hamas, no matter how barbaric they are, have not beheaded babies. That was a hoax story at the beginning to draw more support from the U.S. Propagandize this as if, all Gazans are just complete ogres and complete vile barbarians. That didn't fly. As far as Hamas, saying that they want to wipe Israel off the map and, America's the great Satan and Israel's the small Satan. Well, they do have in their charter the statement that says from the river to the sea, Israel will be free. People take that different ways. A lot of people believe that means equal rights for all Palestinians. As far as the Hamas leadership, yeah, they have talked about how they want to wipe Israel out. But guess who has talked about how they want to wipe the Palestinians out and wipe Gazans out? It's the Likud party, whose charter has the same statement, but in the inverse, that says, from the river to the sea, there'll be greater Israel, essentially. I'm paraphrasing it, but that exists in the Likud charter, too. So Netanyahu's not right. This human shields argument would not fly in the U.S., by the way. Even in a single school, if you captured someone else's child as a hostage and brought them into a school, maybe with other captured hostages, it would not fly to just drop bombs on the whole thing and say, oh, they were being used as human shields. We can kill these villainous, vile idiots that are holding children hostage. That would not work even in a single school, let alone a state the size of New Jersey, which Gaza is.
Like, where in your head do you go like, that sure does sound good? He goes, and look, here's the weird part where there is obviously there is half of this argument, I guess, is somewhat legitimate, where there's no question that, yes, Hamas's goal is to maximize the number of civilian casualties. This is the game that they're playing to kind of demonstrate to the world how brutal the Israelis are by getting a bunch of Palestinians massacred. It turns global opinion against Israel. So that part of it is true, but Netanyahu is sitting here going well, they're going to make these people stay because they're willing to sacrifice them. And then even without having to explicitly admit it, it's right there implied is and then, yeah, we're also willing to sacrifice them. It's okay, so there's a common agreement here. You both think at that point, all right, the price is worth it. So we told them to leave and they didn't, so we're going to kill all of them.
Yeah, and they can't lie to us. We've seen the children pulled out of the rubble, dead corpses, pulled out. Even some people related to very prominent people in the United States have had family members pulled out of the rubble. I know it never gets any mainstream media attention in the U.S. because the Israel lobby's influence is so hardcore, not only in government, but over the mainstream media. But even Justin Amash had direct family members, including a young child, pulled out of the rubble dead over this. So yeah, he's right. And he's also right about the fact that Hamas was never seeking, a traditional war. They didn't think that October 7th would be the thing to undermine Israel and destroy the Israeli state. No, they were trying to lure Israel into doing exactly what they're doing in Gaza right now, to turn international opinion against Israel. And I think they've succeeded in that. That was their end goal. It wasn't thinking that October 7th would do it. Netanyahu has fallen into their trap, much like, by the way, that the U.S. fell into bin Laden's trap when it wasn't the 9/11 attacks that he thought would actually destroy the United States. It was the after results of that and luring the United States into long-term military expeditions and occupations where they would be more sitting ducks and susceptible to attacks in a foreign land. That's exactly what you're seeing here. Same dynamic exists on both sides.
And to sit there and then they try to play this game where if anybody else, let's say in the Western world, goes whoa, no, that is not acceptable at all, that then you come to agreement with Hamas and go, yes, it's fine to kill all these civilians now, and to claim that if you object to that, therefore you're buying into Hamas propaganda is just so childish and ridiculous. Like, why can't it just be option C? I'm over here where I don't like Hamas or you, and I think it's wrong that they want civilian casualties, and I think it's wrong that you're giving it to them. Like, what world are we living in? It's like and then they have the nerve. The Israeli defenders have the nerve to use the term moral clarity, as if like there's clarity to what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying here, but there's not moral clarity to the people who go like, well, if you said move and the babies haven't been moved, don't drop bombs on them.
Yeah, exactly. This is just having the same moral standard and applying it to all sides. It doesn't have to be you're with Hamas or with Israel. If you don't want bloodbath and killing, that doesn't mean you're de facto on the side of Hamas no matter what. They use these same schemes to say, like, if you oppose military intervention in Ukraine, you're a Russian asset, you've chosen the side of Russia, you're part of the Kremlin, etc. They did the same with the Iraq War. If you're against occupying Iraq for 20 years or invading Iraq, you must be a Saddam apologist. If you were against Vietnam, hey, you're a commie that supports Ho Chi Minh. They do the same thing every time when the real America First solution is to get out of this thing. Let's face it, it's Israel clamoring for the money in the U.S. Treasury. It's not Hamas. The Palestinians are getting some U.S. aid, and by the way, some of it's being used to entrap them in murderous schemes where they line up for the aid and then they're attacked and killed in those locations by the IDF. But the United States, for some reason, funds both sides, but Israel far more in this regard. And it's not Hamas that is entitled to the U.S. Treasury to nearly the same extent, and that's why Israel draws more of our ire over this. It's not choosing the side of Hamas. I'd have the U.S. get the hell out of there right now.
What other options do we have here? Because that's not an acceptable one. And you know, I mean, I don't know. It's wild to even hear people try to explain that. You know, I've heard so many people try to make this argument, and now hearing it, you know, from Benjamin Netanyahu himself, and you're like, this just doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense. This is so diametrically opposed to how any of us would ever conceive of morality or moral clarity, for that matter. That you're like, wait, so you told them to move and they did. Even in your scenario, which again, Rob, I mean, you know, and you can get in here and respond too, but like, it does not, you know, the human shields argument, I'm sorry, this just does not account for 80% of the buildings in Gaza being leveled. Okay. Like, you may have a few examples here or there of where Hamas had some weaponry in schools or mosques or something like that. But can anyone show me some evidence that it was around 80% of the buildings in Gaza? No, you can't even come anywhere close to that.
This is so right. It's a great point, and it's something that's rarely covered, is the fact that, again, this would not fly if this happened in the U.S. We would not just sit back and say, hey, this was this criminal gang using our children as human shields. We have to take out the whole thing, and it's, you know, and by the way, if you question that, you've chosen the side of the criminals. It could not happen. This is not justified. We've seen the videos and pictures coming out of Gaza, including on TikTok, and that's why they wanted to ban TikTok, by the way, and might ultimately succeed in that. It wasn't for this ruse of being a Chinese influence tool. It was because that videos and pictures coming out in the form of TikTok videos were showing this on a global stage. Americans have big access to TikTok, whereas a lot of the other things they have access to and media outlets don't show this. So yeah, Dave is right.
You'd almost have to believe that the entire civilian population was Hamas in order to justify destroying this level of the place. But again, much like with the food blockade, even in Benjamin Netanyahu's scenario here, you go, so we tell the people to leave, the people want to leave, Hamas puts a gun in their face and says, you can't leave. That person still feels like a victim to me. Like, where exactly have you gotten to the place where now it's morally acceptable to slaughter these people by the tens of thousands, probably getting up into hundreds of thousands? But like, what? Why? Because so they were forced, and so therefore, like, where in what movie, in what logical train of thought do you go like, you know, like there's a hostage situation over at the bank and they've taken 20 hostages, but we told the hostages to leave. The problem is the man with the gun who took the hostages all told them they're not allowed to leave. So now we got to blow the building up, and there's no more moral issue with that. Like, wait, what? No, that sounds like you're just telling me in a different way that your instruction to leave was meaningless because they don't meaningfully have the option to leave, according to what you're saying.
Yeah, this is exactly right. Kind of what I was getting at earlier. Also, when it comes down to the numbers, I've seen between, 60,000 to 100,000 people have died in Gaza. This was originally a population of about 2 million people, including 1 million children, by the way. Children comprise a large portion of that region. And at its height, Hamas, before October 7th, had something like 35,000, maybe 40,000 members of Hamas. And now, even by liberal estimates, it seems to be something like 15,000. And they're not fighting back at this point, really. No rocket has even been fired from Gaza into Israel since April. And before that, it was starting to become sporadic. Israel's killed the leader of Hamas, etc. This is a war against the civilian population. They're openly saying it in some regard. Moshe Feiglin, the former Israeli politician, got out there and said every child in Gaza is the enemy. Brian Mast in the United States says there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian, putting that on Twitter. This is a bipartisan effort to cleanse that region ethnically of the Palestinians in pursuit of a greater Israel. They're kind of doing the same thing on the West Bank, not in terms of the militarism, but expanding the West Bank settlements. And they're openly talking about concentration zones, including in Rafah, one of the biggest cities, if not the biggest city in Gaza, where they want to be the center of one. So yeah, we see what's playing out.
So, and again, to think of why it would be that people in the Western world would object to this, and to even have to start going, it's because they've been propagandized or they've been lied to or they're siding with Hamas or whatever. It's like, but why can't the option be that we just simply find that horrific in modern societies? We just don't have that view of life being so valueless. And we're like, you can't just kill kids. We insist that you exhaust every option before you ever even consider doing that.
Exactly. And guess what? I would have that same standard if this was reversed. If it was, Gazans and Palestinians that had all the power and were doing this to Israelis, and the U.S. was primarily funding the Gazans, I would have the same response. It's immaterial who the race or class or ethnicity of the person this is happening to. If the U.S. is bankrolling it, if my country is funding and financing this madness and death, I would have the same response. And that's what Dave's getting at here, I think.
And there is something kind of amazing about how Israel gets to be all of these different things for all of these different people. And depending on which person you talk to, they're, you know what I mean? So I remember Will Chamberlain arguing when I debated him about this, that the reason why right-wingers ought to support Israel is because they're a right-wing government, and there's so few right-wing countries out there that we ought to support this one right-wing country. And then if you go listen to the right-wingers, the settlers in the West Bank, they'll just straight up tell you, is that wonderful documentary The Settlers really covered, but there's been lots of interviews with these people over the years, and they'll tell you in their own words what their justification is for why they're allowed to go colonize the West Bank. And what is it, Rob? It's because God gave it to us, period. This is Judea and Samaria. It is what is promised by God to us. And these other people, these non-chosen people who are on it, sorry.
They're not us.
But God's already made up his mind, and this is for us. So we have the right to do whatever we want to. And
yeah, that is the modern Zionist argument in many regards, even though the Old Testament and the, New Testament to a certain level is not the Israel that exists now. The Israel that exists now is the product of a globalist scheme at the UN to enter into a massive land redistribution project that, by the way, if I was on the victim end of it, I would not be happy either. Many of those Palestinians still have the keys to their properties that were seized by them, by the Zionists and by Israelis that took over their homes and pushed them out of them. Also, I would say that calling Israel a conservative society maybe in some regards would pass, but not in general. It doesn't have a right-wing society in terms of healthcare. It has socialized healthcare. And by the way, Americans don't have that. I'm not an advocate of socialized healthcare, but there is something ironic and absurd about the fact that the US is bankrolling Israel when it doesn't have that for its own citizens. And again, I'm not wanting that, but it's telling that the U.S. is still funding them despite the fact that that money that they use for that could be used for their own defense, by the way. That's the point I'm getting at. Also, they have very strict gun control measures in Israel. Owning a gun isn't a right in Israel. It's a very highly restricted privilege that's only allowed for a small number of people. So, you know, that's not exactly right wing the way that Americans would conceive it. There's other examples too, but those are just some things that came to mind.
It is amazing that you can be like this. You could try to brag about being a right-wing society. You can brag about how you're the original biblical chosen tribe of God. And then also, when you're attacking the outside Muslim world, your go-to is like, but we have women and gay rights. There is just a contradiction there that you can't deny. And I do think you also make a point, whereas it probably is important to point out that, like, yeah, look, we don't actually want to live in a society where gays are thrown off buildings or whatever, which, by the way, I don't think that was a thing that was happening in Gaza. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I've read about, like, in Pakistan that happened. But anyway, but yeah, we don't want to live in a society where it's illegal to be gay or violence is brought upon people simply for being homosexual. And we don't want to live in a society where, like, women are oppressed and aren't given the rights to, like, have basic natural rights. But I do think I agree with you, Rob. There's something about just in our current moment, in our current culture, I think going on to the Nelk Boys show and being like, you got to side with us because we're so much more LGBTQ friendly or something like that doesn't seem to be the message that's really resonating with the time. That's my guess.
Yeah, indeed, especially with conservatives. And when conservatives are using both arguments that, we should support Israel monetarily, financially, militarily, because they're a conservative society. But no, also they're the most pro-LGBT community in the Middle East. That doesn't really make that much sense. Conservatives do not generally want these people to be harmed because of that, but it's also something that many conservatives don't want to glorify and edify and, promote as part of the basis of their society. So they use both types of arguments to try to sell Israel and the continual flow of money to Israel.
But yes, and I would just go back over your first point, because I mean, there's really nothing I can add except put an exclamation point behind what you were just saying. But, like, the idea that Hamas, with the aid of Hezbollah or something like that, is not only going to take over the Middle East, they're going to take over Europe and North America too, if not for a country the size of New Jersey who needs $4.5 billion of welfare every year to live from us. If not for our welfare, New Jersey-sized state in the Middle East, they'd just be taking over the whole world. But because of Israel, you see, they can't even take over Gaza. Like, I mean, this is just purely it's relying on the fact that you'd have to know absolutely nothing. You'd have to know absolutely nothing about anything in order for you to ever think that there was a chance. I mean, if you tried to really think to yourself about how much more powerful, say, I don't know, Spain is, like just in terms of or Germany or something like this, right? Like how much more in terms of like GDP, in terms of, in terms of technological advancements, like these are countries that are just enormously more power than Hezbollah. Hezbollah is, at this point they're pretty beat up, but even before like the pager attack or something like that, Hezbollah was what? Like a militia who controlled southern Lebanon, who had kind of made the transition into being like a political entity. Like they had gotten big enough where you would probably call them not just like, not just the militia that they were in the 80s or even in the early 2000s. They would almost be something approaching like kind of a military, but still they're not like a European rich country or anything like that that has that type of GDP to pull on. Hamas, I mean, give me a break. But like, anyway, so my point being, like, let's say Germany is like 100,000 times more powerful than any of them. If anyone told you right now that Germany was going to take over all of Europe and then take over North America, you'd immediately be like, there's just no chance. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, this is so absurd. I made a mistake earlier. I referred to Gaza the size of New Jersey. I didn't mean that. It's much smaller than New Jersey. Israel is the size of New Jersey, essentially. So Dave is right here. Now, this is absolutely true. It's just so absurd, especially with Israel as the only power in that region in the Middle East with nukes, to think that Hamas and Hezbollah is going to overtake them and overtake the region and then maybe pose a threat to outside regions. It's so absurd given the power level they have. And Germany, Dave's right about the response would be toward Germany, and Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons even. So this is just, it's absurd propaganda designed to get Americans to continue supporting Israel no matter what. Israel first foreign policy, get drawn into whatever they want to do, get drawn into whatever regime change operation they want to pull off. The U.S. almost did that. That was on the table in Iran. And just there be no consequences for it outside of diminished, sabotaged aims of the U.S. like was the potential to normalize relations with Iran. That's what we get from this. So yeah, it's so absurd. It's even more absurd than saying, hey, Putin is going to invade Poland tomorrow. They're going to go to Germany right after that. They're going to push into France and establish, a new empire, a new Hitlerian empire. They always draw the distinction to Hitler, too, because if you oppose funding for any of this, adversarial mentality toward nuclear powers, well, you're obviously just a Kremlin agent and you're a neo-Chamberlain. You're a new Neville Chamberlain. That's what they say every time.
There's no chance that they're capable of doing that. As I thought it was ridiculous when people were saying Vladimir Putin's going to take Poland next.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you sit there and you go, really? A country with like a $2 trillion GDP that's struggling to take Ukraine is going to pick a fight with all of NATO next? But like, as ridiculous as that was, that just, it pales in comparison to saying that that Iran and her proxies will take over the entire world. This is it. We'd all be speaking Persian if it wasn't for Israel. That's what you're going with, Netanyahu? Really? That was your final answer? All right. I don't know.
Yeah, total absurdity. With Israel remaining the only nuclear power in the Middle East, it doesn't seem like, even if all U.S. support was withdrawn, that these sorts of things would even be a remote possibility. It's just because of the power of the Israel lobby and the neocons and the establishment liberals that, Americans still throw money into the coffers of Netanyahu and finance his genocide in Gaza, finance his absurd wars, the wars he's always pushed America into, including in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Iran. Of course, complicity on both sides of the ocean there. Terrible neocons and vile warmongers always supported that too. People closely aligned to Netanyahu in terms of political strategy and political goals, certainly so. But Dave's right. This whole interview with Netanyahu was just a total propaganda fest to sell that it isn't Israel killing people in Gaza. Somehow it's Hamas that's responsible for all of this. Well, you can talk to the people there, and it isn't Hamas weapons killing the people in multitudes. There's been so many people that have died there. There's been over 150,000 missing, in addition to those that we know are dead, that many of which are likely dead. The numbers are just so much higher probably than we even know right now. And it'll probably take years and years to sift through the rubble and kind of make deductions about how destructive, how insane, how immoral this genocide is. And hey, both parties in the U.S. are perfectly complicit with this. They rarely talk about it. When they do talk about it, for the most part, it's to just, pin the whole thing on Hamas. Well, this was a disproportional attack against Palestinians most of which aren't Hamas. I'm sorry, half the frickin' region is children. They're not Hamas. This is absolutely nuts, and I don't think posterity, when looking back on these moments, will judge Americans well for it. Human shields argument has always been bogus. It wouldn't fly in any other place other than Israel, and international PR has taken a turn and judged Israel particularly harshly for what's going on. And I'm not big on, caring that much about international opinion. I get to the same place by just looking at where American tax money is going, especially as Americans are languishing under high inflation. They can say that the numbers are going down, but the CPI doesn't have every good in service that we're seeing explode in cost, and Americans know that every time they go to the grocery store. Americans are in debt. The U.S. national debt is $37 trillion right now. And instead of taking care of domestic concerns, and even if I would have a problem with that domestic strategy, though that money's still going overseas anyways, to these fruitless forever wars. Stop the empire building. Stop throwing American money into the coffers of Netanyahu and supporting this madness. That's the only strategy. That's the only America First strategy. And that doesn't mean we pick the side of Hamas. It's utterly absurd. America First means keeping the American treasury devoted to America. America should be the center point and centerpiece of American policy. That's that. And for all the America First vitriol that, Trump and his supporters throw out, they don't seem to hold that same standard when it comes to Israel. So that's what I'll say about that. Let me know in the comments below, is Dave Smith right about this? What do you think about Netanyahu? Is there any other points you'd like to add about why he's wrong? Is there any merits to what he's saying? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Dave too. He is awesome. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you'll support the channel and get access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.